She hadn't eaten in 2 days when she knocked on his door. Not because she was proud. Maya Bennett had long buried pride somewhere between the third eviction notice and the night her children cried themselves to sleep, asking why Daddy wasn't coming home. She knocked because a dead man had told her to. Because somewhere inside that worn shoebox she carried like a wound, there was an envelope with another man's name on it. A man she had spent 12 months trying not to think about. She didn't know he'd been thinking about her too. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Like, stay until the end. This one will stay with you. The rain came down the way it always does in the mountains. Not gently, not dramatically, just relentlessly, like it had somewhere important to be and didn't particularly care who got soaked along the way. Maya Bennett had been standing on the sidewalk across from the Hayes property for 11 minutes before she finally made herself move. She knew it was 11 minutes because she'd checked her phone 3 times, not for messages since nobody was texting her these days, but because counting minutes gave her something to do besides turn around and go home. Home. That was a generous word for what she had now. She shifted the shoebox under her arm and pulled her coat tighter. The coat was black, or had been once. Now it was the kind of faded that didn't have a name, somewhere between charcoal and defeat. She'd bought it 6 years ago when things were different, when Daniel was alive and they used to argue about stupid things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or whether they could afford the nicer cut of meat at the grocery store. Those arguments felt like a different life, because they were. The Hayes house wasn't what most people imagined when they heard the word mansion. Ethan Hayes had never been that kind of billionaire, not the marble columns and electric gates kind. The property was large, yes, set back from the road on about 3 acres of land with old oak trees that had been there longer than Asheville itself. The house was craftsman style, dark wood siding, wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides, warm amber light coming through the windows even at 3 in the afternoon. It looked like a place where someone actually lived, which was both comforting and, right now, deeply intimidating. Maya had been here twice before. Once for a 4th of July barbecue 4 years ago, when Daniel and Ethan had stood at the grill arguing about the right way to smoke ribs while she and little Sophie sat on the porch steps and ate watermelon, and it was genuinely one of the best afternoons she could remember. Once for the funeral arrangements. She didn't think about that afternoon if she could help it. She crossed the street. The gravel driveway crunched under her boots, one of which had a small separation at the toe that let water in when she walked through puddles, which she'd been doing for the last 4 blocks because the sidewalks in this part of town didn't drain properly. She could feel her left sock soaking through. It was not a dignified feeling. She climbed the porch steps, 4 of them, and stood in front of the door. There was a doorbell. She stared at it. "You could still leave," some part of her said. "You could put the envelope in the mailbox, walk away, and never do this." She thought about Daniel's handwriting on the outside of that envelope, the way he'd pressed too hard with the pen, the way he always did, so the letters had that slightly embossed quality. She thought about sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning 11 months ago, reading his letters one by one, and coming to this particular envelope last, the one with Ethan written on the front, and beneath it, in smaller letters, underlined twice. 1 year, please, she rang the doorbell. For a long moment, nothing. Then she heard footsteps, light ones, quick, definitely a child, and a small voice saying, "Daddy, someone's at the door." And then heavier footsteps, slower, deliberate, and Maya had approximately 4 seconds to compose herself before the door swung open. Ethan Hayes looked like a man who had recently been in the middle of making dinner and had not quite finished the job. He was wearing a gray thermal shirt with a dish towel tucked into the waistband of his jeans, holding a wooden spoon in one hand, and had what appeared to be a small amount of tomato sauce on his left forearm. His hair, dark brown, always slightly too long in the back, was pushed off his forehead like he'd been running his hands through it, which he probably had been. He did that when he was concentrating. She remembered that about him. He was 32 years old and looked it, not in a bad way, just in the way of someone who had lived the last few years with a specific kind of weight. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there at the 4th of July barbecue. His jaw carried more tension than she remembered. He saw her and every single thing on his face changed at once. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in movies where a man's expression collapses into obvious emotion. It was subtler than that. A flicker of something behind his eyes. a micro-adjustment in the set of his jaw, the hand holding the wooden spoon going very slightly still. Maya. His voice came out quieter than he probably intended. Hey, Ethan. Hers came out steadier than she felt. I'm sorry to just show up. I know I should have called first. No, it's fine. He blinked, seemed to remember himself, stepped back from the doorway. Come in, please. You're soaking. I'm okay. Maya, your coat is dripping. She looked down. He was right. She was leaving small puddles on his porch. Yeah, she admitted. It's raining pretty hard. Come inside. She did. The entryway smelled like garlic and wood smoke and something faintly sweet, probably whatever Lily was baking, Maya guessed, or trying to bake, since from the kitchen came the distinct sound of a small person dramatically opening and closing cabinet doors. Lily Hayes was 8 years old and built like a question mark, always bent toward something, always curious, always in the middle of investigating whatever currently held her interest. Maya had met her twice. Once at the barbecue, when Lily had been 4 and had attached herself to Maya's older child, Marcus, with the single-minded intensity only small children can manage. And once at the funeral, briefly, when Ethan had kept her close to his side, and Lily had been unusually quiet in the way children get when they understand something is wrong, but not exactly what. Lily, can you give me a few minutes? Ethan called toward the kitchen. A pause. Then, is it a grown-up conversation? It's a grown-up conversation. Another pause, longer. Are there snacks? I'll get you a snack in a minute. Fine. The cabinet door stopped. Footsteps retreated toward the back of the house. Ethan turned to Maya with the small, helpless expression of a man being perpetually outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old. You want to sit down? I'm making pasta. Nothing fancy. You want some? You should eat something. You look... He stopped himself. Maya tilted her head slightly. I look what? I was going to say tired. I was going to say, you look tired. I am tired. Yeah, he exhaled. I figured, come on. She sat at the kitchen island, wide, dark wood, with stools that were slightly too tall for her, so her feet didn't quite reach the ground. She set the shoebox on the counter beside her and folded her hands around it without thinking, the way she'd been doing for weeks now. Like it was something fragile. Ethan put a pot of water on to boil and stood across from her, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, the wooden spoon still in his hand. He was doing that thing where he was pretending to be calm. Maya had watched him do it 1,000 times. At charity dinners, at business meetings she'd attended with Daniel, at the hospital the night Daniel was admitted. Ethan Hayes did not fall apart in front of people. He stood up straight and crossed his arms and breathed evenly, and you would never know what was happening underneath. How are the kids? He asked. Marcus started 5th grade. He's good. He handles things. She paused. Ava doesn't sleep great still. Ethan nodded slowly. Lily still has nights, too. Neither of them said what they meant, which was, our children are still processing losing someone they loved, and we don't know how to help them because we're still processing it ourselves. And you? He asked. Work? Maya picked at a small chip in the countertop that wasn't there. I'm at the diner 5 mornings a week. Evening cleaning shifts at the medical building on Lexington, 3 nights. She said it the way she said everything about her situation these days. Flat, factual, not asking for anything. Something moved across Ethan's face. Not pity. She'd become an expert at reading pity and would have shut down immediately. It was something else. More like pain. Maya, I didn't come here to talk about that. She said it gently but clearly. I came here because of this. She put her hands flat on the box. Daniel left letters. I found them after the services in his desk. There were a lot of them. Some for me, some for the kids, a few for his parents. She swallowed. There was one for you, with a note on it. It said 1 year. The kitchen was very quiet. The water on the stove had started making small pre-boiling sounds. 1 year from when? Ethan's voice had changed, rougher. From the day he died. She slid the box toward him. I've been holding this for 12 months and 3 days. Ethan didn't move immediately. He looked at the box the way you look at something you're not sure you're ready for. You carried that here in the rain, he said. "I carry it everywhere. I couldn't leave it home." He looked up at her. Whatever he was thinking, he didn't say. He set the wooden spoon down on the counter, reached into the box, and found the envelope with his name on it almost immediately, like he'd been drawn to it. And he stood there holding it with both hands for a long moment before he opened it. Maya looked away while he read. She'd made herself that promise weeks ago when she'd started thinking seriously about delivering this. She didn't know what was in the letter. She'd been enormously, painfully tempted to read it. She was human, and Daniel was her husband, and the idea of him sending secret messages to another person from beyond the grave was not the most comfortable thing to sit with. But she hadn't read it. It had Ethan's name on it. It was his. So she looked at the kitchen instead. It was a nice kitchen, clean, but not clinical. The kind of clean that happens when someone genuinely tries to keep up with it, but is also raising a child alone and doesn't always succeed. There was a drawing stuck to the fridge with a magnet, Lily's, obviously, a family portrait of stick figures with a dog, even though as far as Maya knew, Ethan didn't have a dog. Maybe Lily was lobbying for one. On the counter by the stove was a well-used cookbook with a cracked spine and several pages tabbed. A small plant on the windowsill was doing its level best to survive. One of its leaves had gone slightly yellow. Maya stared at the yellow leaf. She heard Ethan's breathing change. Not dramatically. Just the rhythm of it shifted, became less controlled, and she heard him exhale through his nose, slow and deliberate, the way you exhale when you're trying very hard not to do something else. She didn't turn around. She heard paper fold. Heard it fold again. Heard him set it down on the counter. Silence. Then, he knew. Maya turned. What? Ethan was looking at the letter, not at her. His jaw was tight. Daniel. He knew things he never said out loud. He stopped, seemed to be choosing words carefully, which was unusual for him. Ethan had always been direct to the point of bluntness. He wrote about you. What did he say? He said, Ethan stopped again, picked up the letter, set it down, picked it up again. He said a lot of things. He said he'd watched me for years, said he thought he knew me better than I knew myself. A short breath that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. That sounds like him. It does. He asked me to look after you and the kids. Ethan finally looked up. He wasn't being transactional about it. He wasn't giving instructions like some kind of arrangement. He was asking. He said, please. His voice caught slightly on that word. Daniel never said please. Maya's throat tightened. No, he didn't. He said, Ethan looked back at the letter. He said he didn't want guilt to be the thing that stopped either of us from living. His words, not mine. The water on the stove had reached a full boil. Neither of them moved to address it. Maya said quietly, Either of us? Ethan set the letter down. He looked at her for the first time since he'd started reading. Really looked at her, not the carefully neutral glance of someone managing a difficult situation, but something more direct and more uncomfortable. He figured things out that I never said to anyone. His voice was careful. Things I barely let myself think. The boiling water filled the silence between them. Maya didn't ask him to clarify. She wasn't sure she was ready to. She thought about the barbecue 4 years ago. She thought about a dozen other moments she'd spent a year and a half telling herself meant nothing. She thought about the night Daniel got his diagnosis, and she'd called Ethan before she'd even finished crying, because he was Daniel's best friend, and she needed someone who loved Daniel the same way she did. And he'd driven 40 minutes at 2 a.m. and sat in their kitchen until dawn. She thought about how she'd felt in the weeks after Daniel died, when she caught herself wondering how Ethan was holding up, how that had made her feel like a terrible person, how she'd pushed it down and kept pushing. I should turn the stove off, Ethan said. Yeah, he turned the stove off, stood with his back to her for a moment, hands flat on the counter. When he turned back around, he'd reset his expression. Not closed off exactly, but contained, like someone who'd just had a very large feeling and was now carefully putting it somewhere manageable. Are you staying for dinner? He asked. Maya blinked. What? I'm making pasta. I always make too much. He moved to the fridge, opened it, started taking things out with the purposeful efficiency of someone who needed to do something with their hands. Lily's going to lose her mind when she realizes you're here. She's been asking about Marcus and Ava since August. I've been telling her maybe. You told her about my kids? They talked about you. He set a block of Parmesan on the counter. After the funeral, Lily asked me if Marcus and Ava were okay. I told her they were figuring things out. She made me promise to tell her how they were doing. He paused. She's 8. She holds people to things. Maya looked at this man standing in his kitchen, holding a block of cheese, doing everything in his power not to make this moment any bigger than she could handle. She thought about 12 months of silence, 12 months of not calling because it felt complicated and wrong, of running into mutual friends who mentioned Ethan in passing and changing the subject immediately, 12 months of carrying that box like it was made of glass. Pasta sounds good, she said. Something in Ethan's shoulders loosened, barely perceptibly. Good. Lily's reaction to finding Maya at the kitchen island was, predictably, an event. She appeared in the kitchen doorway at approximately the moment Ethan was salting the pasta water, took one look at the visitor, and immediately said, with the full, unfiltered confidence of an 8-year-old who had not yet learned to be uncertain about her feelings, "You're Marcus and Ava's mom." "I am," Maya said. "Are they here?" "Not tonight. It's just me." Lily processed this with visible effort, clearly weighing her disappointment against her general enthusiasm for company. Enthusiasm won. She climbed onto the stool next to Maya's with the coordinated grace of a child who has done this 1,000 times and fixed her with an evaluating look. She had Ethan's dark hair and her mother's eyes, Maya thought, or what she imagined her mother's eyes must have looked like, since she'd never met Caitlin Hayes, who had left when Lily was 3. Not enough information to know for sure, but there was something in the way Lily observed things, directly, thoroughly, without embarrassment, that felt entirely her own. "Daddy says you knew my Uncle Daniel," Lily said. The word hit Maya somewhere behind the sternum. Uncle Daniel. The name Lily had used for her father's best friend, the man who had come to birthday parties and pushed her on the swings and taught her, somewhat disastrously, how to whistle. "I did," Maya said. "He was my husband." Lily blinked. "Like Daddy's wife?" "Like Daddy's wife. But Daniel was a boy, so…" "Husband." "Oh." Lily considered this. "Daddy doesn't have a wife." "I know. He says he's doing fine." From across the kitchen, Ethan said flatly, "Lily." "What?" "She might want to know." "She doesn't need you to narrate my life to her." Lily turned to Maya with an expression that communicated quite clearly, "I'm going to narrate his life to you anyway." "He cooks dinner every night," she reported, "even when he's tired, and he comes to all my school things even when he has meetings. And he was sad for a really long time, but now he's mostly okay." She paused. "Sometimes he's still sad, but he doesn't think I notice." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Ethan had his back to them, stirring something. Maya could see the tension in his spine. "You notice a lot of things," Maya told Lily. "Dad says I have observatory skills." "Observational." "Yeah, that." Maya smiled. It was the first genuine smile that had reached her whole face in longer than she could immediately calculate. They ate at the dining room table, which felt slightly too large for 3 people, but not in an uncomfortable way, more in the way of a table that had been built for more, that was waiting. Ethan had made a simple pasta with roasted tomatoes and some kind of fresh herb Maya couldn't quite identify, and it was genuinely very good. She ate more than she intended to, which was the first sign that she'd needed this more than she'd let herself admit. Lily talked almost continuously throughout dinner, about school, about a project she was doing on migratory birds, about a conflict with a classmate named Priya that seemed to involve a disputed pencil case and strong feelings on both sides. Ethan interjected occasionally with questions or gentle corrections, or once a completely straight-faced observation that caused Lily to burst into laughter and almost knock over her water glass. Maya watched them. She'd been around them together at the barbecue years ago, but Lily had been 4 then, and the dynamic had been different, younger, simpler. What she saw now was something more developed, the specific language that builds between a parent and a child when it's just the 2 of them for long enough. The shorthand, the in-jokes. The way Lily's eyes always found her father's face first when she was unsure about something. The way Ethan tracked her in his peripheral vision, even when he was looking somewhere else. He was a good father. Maya had known that in the abstract. Seeing it up close was something else. After dinner, Lily helped clear the table with the half-hearted compliance of someone who had been specifically told that helping clear the table was non-negotiable, and then disappeared upstairs with the book she'd been reading. And the house got quiet in the specific way it does when a child has gone to bed in another part of it. Ethan made coffee. Maya sat at the island again. "She's incredible," Maya said. "She's a lot," Ethan said, with a complicated expression that translated to, "She's the most incredible thing in my life, and I'm terrified of failing her every day. She knows things. Too many things." He set a mug in front of Maya. "She asked me once if I was lonely, 6 years old." "What did you say?" "I said I had her." He wrapped his hands around his own mug. "Which is true. But also, not exactly an answer." Maya looked at her coffee. "Daniel used to say you were the most private person he knew, that you could be in a room full of people and still be completely alone." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He wasn't wrong. He also said it was the thing about you that drove him the most crazy, because you could handle everything without asking for help and you thought that was a virtue. He said that? Not always kindly. A ghost of something crossed Ethan's face. "No, yeah, we had that argument a few times." He set his mug down. "He was one of the only people who ever called me on it. Actually called me on it, not just hinted." "That was Daniel?" "Yeah." The rain outside had gotten heavier. Maya could hear it on the windows, that particular sound of a mountain storm deciding to stay. She thought about her left boot with the separated sole, and the walk back to where she'd parked her car, a block and a half away, and the drive home through the winding roads to the small rented house on the east side of town where Marcus and Ava were with their neighbor Mrs. Calloway, who had kindly offered to watch them for the evening. She thought about the empty side of her bed that she still somehow woke up facing the wrong direction from, like her body hadn't learned yet. "The letter," Maya said. "The thing he said about not letting guilt get in the way." She kept her eyes on her mug. "Did that feel strange to you, reading that?" "Yes," Ethan said immediately, and the honesty of it made her look up. He was watching her with that same direct look from before dinner, not performing anything, not being careful, just present. "It felt strange," he said, "and it felt like Daniel, completely, exactly like him. To see something that nobody was saying out loud and just name it, put it in ink, make you deal with it." Maya's chest felt tight. "I don't know what to do with it." "Neither do I." He was quiet for a beat. "I know what I felt when I saw you standing on my porch. I know what I've been not thinking about for the last year. I know that." He exhaled slowly. "What I do with it that's different. We can't just, I know. He's only been gone a year." "I know, Maya. And there's the kids to think about and what people would, I know." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not saying we do anything. I'm not trying to make this into something tonight. I'm just saying." He picked up his mug, looked at it. "It's honest. The letter was honest. And I think you deserve to know that I read it, and I didn't think he was wrong." Maya sat with that. The rain came down outside. Somewhere upstairs, Lily's light was probably still on. "I should get back," Maya said, after a while. "Mrs. Calloway has to be home by 10. Let me get you an umbrella." "You don't have to—" "Maya." He gave her a look. "Let me get you an umbrella." He got her an umbrella. It was a large one, dark green, slightly beaten up along one edge in a way that suggested it had been in the back of his car for years. He walked her to the door, and she stood on the porch in the arc of the porch light with the rain coming down just past its edge, and felt the strange, disorienting experience of not wanting to leave a place. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Thank you for coming, He glanced at the shoebox, which she'd tucked under her arm again. "For keeping your promise to him." "He asked me to wait a year." She looked at the box. "I kept thinking about that. Why a year? What was supposed to happen in a year?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe he thought we'd both figure something out." "Did you?" He considered that for a moment, honest. "I'm working on it." Maya stepped out into the rain, opened the umbrella, turned back once. He was still standing in the doorway, arms crossed, the light behind him, watching her go. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah?" She almost said something. She could feel it sitting right there. Not a declaration, nothing dramatic, just an acknowledgement. Something like, "I kept thinking about you this year. I felt terrible about it. I think I needed to say that to someone." Instead, she said, "The plant on your kitchen windowsill, the one by the stove, the leaf that's going yellow. It's getting too much direct sun. Move it to the other side and it'll come back." He looked at her for a second, then, "Good to know." She walked back to her car through the rain. She didn't look back again, but she thought about the way he'd stood in that doorway until she couldn't see him anymore. She thought about it the whole drive home. The house was quiet when she got back. The kids asleep, Mrs. Calloway on her way out with a thermos of tea, and no real curiosity about where Maya had been. Maya stood in the kitchen alone and set the shoebox on the table and opened it one more time. All the letters were there except one, the empty space where Ethan's envelope had been looked, somehow, like a decision. She touched the edge of it, thought about Daniel sitting at his own desk, pen pressed too hard, writing things he'd never said out loud because he knew time was running short and he needed these particular things said. She thought about what he had understood about both of them that they hadn't understood about themselves. She closed the box. She made herself a cup of tea she didn't really want and sat at the table in the quiet house. And for the first time in 13 months, she didn't cry before she went to sleep. That wasn't nothing. That was maybe the first small brick of something she didn't have a name for yet. But she thought she might, eventually, learn to call it forward. 3 weeks passed before Ethan called her. Maya was at the diner when it happened. Tuesday morning, 6:47, the tail end of the breakfast rush, when the tables were still full but the kitchen had stopped being frantic, and she could almost breathe again. She was refilling the coffee for a man in a construction jacket who came in every Tuesday and always ordered the same thing and never once said thank you when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She didn't check it until her break. She stood outside in the narrow alley behind the diner where the other servers went to smoke, though she didn't smoke, and read the message. "How's the plant doing?" She stared at it for a moment. Then she started laughing, quietly, with her back against the brick wall, in a way she hadn't laughed at something in long enough that it felt slightly foreign, like a muscle she hadn't used. She typed back, "It was touch and go for a while, but I think it's going to make it." His response took 4 minutes. "Good. That's good to hear." Then nothing for another minute, and then, "Lilia's been asking about Marcus and Ava. I told her maybe sometime, but I wanted to check with you first." Maya read that twice, the careful way he'd phrased it. "I wanted to check with you first." Not assuming, not deciding, asking. She typed back, "Marcus has soccer Saturdays. Ava's free, though. And I think she'd like Lily. Saturday afternoon works, if you want. No pressure." She put her phone in her pocket and went back to refilling coffee for people who didn't say thank you. But something had shifted in the specific weight she'd been carrying around her sternum since October, and she noticed it even if she didn't name it. She told herself it was just the kids getting together. It was just a play date. People did that. It didn't have to be anything more complicated than two bereaved adults letting their children spend an afternoon in the same space because children needed other children, and she needed Ava to have something to do on a Saturday that wasn't watching cartoons and asking when Daddy was coming back. A question Maya still didn't know how to answer in a way that landed softly. She told herself all of that, and most of it was even true. Saturday came. She drove Ava over at 2 in the afternoon, and Ava, who was 6 and had developed since her father's death a tendency towards silence and close observation that worried Maya every single day, walked up Ethan's porch steps behind her mother without saying a word. Until the front door opened and Lily appeared and said, with the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided how this was going to go, "You're Ava. I'm Lily. Do you want to see my bird book? I have pictures of 412 species." Ava blinked. "I like birds," she said. "Good," Lily said, and stepped back from the door, and that was the end of that. Ethan stood behind Lily in the doorway, looking mildly astonished, the way parents look when their socially intense child pulls off a connection that you weren't sure was going to happen. "That went better than I expected," he said. "Lily's confident," Maya said. "Lily has never second-guessed herself in her life. I have no idea where she gets it from." He pushed the door wider. "Come in. I made too much coffee again. It's a problem I have." Maya came in. This time felt different from the first time, and both of them probably felt that, though neither acknowledged it. The first time had been weighted with the letter and the rain and 12 months of accumulated silence. This felt not normal, that wasn't the right word, but less precarious. Like they'd agreed, without discussing it, to take one step at a time and not try to figure out where the path went before they'd actually walked any of it. They sat on the back porch with their coffee while the girls disappeared into Lily's room with the bird book and what appeared to be an ambitious craft project involving feathers and a poster board that Lily had been planning for reasons she hadn't fully explained. The backyard was brown and cold, November having arrived with the businesslike efficiency it always does in the mountains, but the porch had a roof and a space heater, and it wasn't unpleasant. "She sleeps better," Maya said after a while. "Ava, this past week she slept through 4 nights in a row." Ethan turned his coffee mug in his hands. "That's good." "It's huge. She was waking up at 2, 3 in the morning for months. I'd hear her through the wall. She wouldn't always cry. I'd look in and she'd be sitting up in the dark, just staring." Lily went through a thing where she didn't want lights off. For about 6 months, every light in the upstairs hallway had to be on. I bought so many night lights. He paused. "She still sleeps with one. The seahorse one. She says she's keeping it for scientific purposes." Maya smiled. "What does that mean?" "No idea, but she's sleeping, so I'm not questioning the seahorse." From inside the house came the sound of Lily's voice explaining something at length, punctuated by an occasional small response from Ava. Maya listened to her daughter's voice and felt the tight thing in her chest loosen, fraction by fraction. "I was thinking about the letter," she said. She said it without planning to. It came out the way things come out when you've been sitting on them too long, and the quiet finally gives them room. "About what you said, that he wasn't wrong." Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard. "I meant it. I know." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I've been trying to... I keep going back to it, trying to figure out when it started, for me, trying to put a date on it, which is a stupid exercise." She exhaled. "But I keep doing it anyway." "Did you find one? A date?" "Not a date. A night." She hesitated. "The night Daniel told me about his diagnosis. You came over. You stayed until morning, and when you left..." She stopped. "Maya, I'm not saying this to make it weird. I'm saying it because I spent a year and a half telling myself I was a terrible person for it, and I'm tired of that." She turned to look at him directly. "When you left, I watched you walk to your car, and I thought something I had no business thinking, and I buried it immediately, and I didn't look at it again, and I spent the next 8 months being a good wife to my husband who was sick, and I loved him, and I would have done anything in the world for him." Her voice stayed steady through all of that, which surprised her. But it was there, and apparently he saw it. Ethan had turned to look at her at some point during that, and he didn't look away now. There was something complicated on his face, not easy to read, the specific expression of someone processing more than one thing at the same time. "I want to be honest with you," he said slowly, "about my version." "Okay." He looked back at the yard. "When Daniel and I first became friends, we were 21, 22. We just both started our companies. We had nothing. We were completely broke and completely convinced it was all going to work out. I met you 6 months later." A pause. "I liked you. More than I should have, given that he'd talked about you for all 6 of those months before I'd ever laid eyes on you." Another pause. "I put it away, because he was my best friend and you clearly belonged to each other, and it was obvious to everyone how much you loved each other. I didn't examine it, I just buried it, and I was his friend, and I was happy for him." Maya said nothing. "Then he got sick," Ethan said, "and I buried it deeper. Because who does that? Who even allows themselves to..." He stopped. "And then he died. And I kept waiting to feel relief about burying it, like at least that was one thing I could let go of." He set his mug down on the porch rail. "That's not what happened." The yard was very still. A cardinal landed in the far oak tree and then left again immediately. "What did happen?" Maya asked quietly. "I thought about you more, not less." He said it plainly, without drama, like a man reading a weather report about his own interior. "I told myself it was grief, some kind of transferred grief." I told myself it was because you were connected to Daniel, and losing you as a presence in my life was part of losing him. He glanced at her. I'm pretty good at rationalizing. I've noticed. The thing about the letter, he picked up his mug again, held it without drinking. The thing that got me was that he used the word guilt. He specifically said, don't let guilt destroy your chance, which means he knew we'd both be feeling guilty about it, which means he understood what it was, and he stopped. He wasn't angry. He was just asking us not to waste the rest of our lives punishing ourselves for something that wasn't a betrayal. Maya thought about Daniel's handwriting on those envelopes. The pen pressed too hard, the careful, deliberate underlines. He was smarter than he let on, she said. He really was. Something in Ethan's voice broke at the edges on that, just slightly, just enough to be real. I miss him every day. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, this is not me moving on from losing him. I don't think I get to just move on from losing him. No, she said. Neither do I. But he asked us not to stop moving, which is different. The heater hummed. Inside, Lily was explaining the difference between two types of warblers with the conviction of someone who had recently become an authority on the subject and intended to use this authority as often as possible. I'm not ready for anything, Maya said. I need you to know that. I'm working 2 jobs. I'm trying to hold my kids together. I barely sleep, and most days I'm just trying to get to the end of the day intact. I know. I'm not saying that to shut this down. I'm saying it because if we're going to be in each other's lives again, you should know what you're actually walking into. It's not pretty. Ethan turned to look at her again. Maya, I've known you for almost 8 years. I know you haven't slept properly since 2018. I know you haven't asked anyone for help since before Marcus was born. I know you put everyone else's oxygen mask on before your own and then quietly suffocate and pretend you're fine. He paused. I'm not walking into anything I don't have my eyes open about. She looked at him. He held the look, not blinking, not backing away. Okay, she said finally. Okay. From inside, Ava, do you know what the rufous-sided towhee sounds like? Listen. Followed by what was either an impressive bird call impression or a small catastrophe, it was difficult to tell. Both of them listened for a moment, then Ethan said, Should I check? She's fine, Maya said. She's laughing. He went quiet, listening. Through the glass door, they could both faintly hear it. Ava's laugh, slightly rusty from disuse, being coaxed out by an 8-year-old with a bird book and zero awareness that this was supposed to be hard. Maya felt something crack in her chest and let it. She didn't look away from the yard, didn't make it into a moment, just breathed through it quietly while the heater hummed and somewhere above them her daughter laughed. The rest of the afternoon was, by any reasonable measure, ordinary. Lily gave Ava a guided tour of the upstairs like a docent at a small museum. Ethan made hot chocolate without being asked, which was the specific kindness of someone who had been paying attention. Ava ate her hot chocolate with the careful deliberation of a child who was still figuring out how much of herself to bring to a new place. And Lily ate hers in 3 enormous gulps and immediately started talking about the next bird project she intended to undertake. By 5 o'clock, when Maya gathered Ava and her jacket and her daughter's half of the craft project, a cheerful, chaotic poster she was already making plans to hang in her room, Ethan walked them to the car and Lily stood on the porch and waved with both arms until they turned out of the driveway. She's my friend now, Ava reported from the back seat. Yeah? Maya watched the road. You like her? She knows 412 birds. Ava said this the way another child might say she knows magic tricks. She said she's going to teach me the calls. That sounds like Lily. She said we could come back. Maybe we can. Ava was quiet for a moment and then, Mom? Yeah, babe? Is Ethan nice? Maya navigated a curve in the road. The mountains had gone dark at the edges, the sky that particular deep blue of early winter evenings. Yeah, she said. He is. Ava seemed to consider that. Then she turned back to the window and watched the trees go by, and that was all she said about it. But that night, she slept all the way through again. The weeks that followed were careful ones. There was no announcement, no definition, no conversation in which either Ethan or Maya named what was happening between them. What there was instead was a series of small accumulations, the kind that are only visible in retrospect. He started texting her on Tuesday mornings, when she was at the diner, not with anything that required a response, but just things that struck him. A photograph of the plant on his windowsill, now fully recovered from its sun exposure, and apparently thriving, with the caption, "Patient is doing well." An article she might find interesting. Once, a voice memo that was just 45 seconds of Lily attempting to teach herself to whistle badly while Ethan tried and failed to keep a straight face in the background. Maya listened to that one 3 times. She brought soup when Ava got a cold in December, and Ethan called because Lily was running a fever at the same time. Not because he'd asked her to, but because she had soup and 2 sick kids seemed like a situation that called for another adult, and neither of them made it into anything more than that. She sat on Lily's bed and read to her while Ethan got Ava set up on the couch with a movie. And somewhere around the 3rd chapter of the book, Lily had chosen, a somewhat advanced novel about a girl who could communicate with crows. Lily looked at Maya from under her stack of blankets and said, with the directness that was apparently her permanent mode, "You're here a lot now." "I am," Maya agreed. "Is that okay with you?" Lily asked. "Being here a lot." Maya looked at her. 8 years old, fever warm, 3 blankets, asking an adult if the adult was doing all right. "Yeah," Maya said. "It is." "Good," Lily said. "Me too. Keep reading." And there was the afternoon in late December, a Sunday, when Maya arrived to pick up Ava. Ava and Lily had graduated from Saturday playdates to occasional sleepovers with a speed that suggested neither girl had consulted any adult before deciding this was how things were going to be. And Ethan was fixing the gutter on the south side of the house, standing on a ladder in the cold in a jacket that had seen better years. And when he came down, he had a cut on his hand from the gutter bracket. Nothing serious, just enough to bleed. And Maya said, "Come inside, let me look at that." And he said, "It's fine." And she said, "It's not fine, you're bleeding on my sleeve," which he was. And they stood in his kitchen while she cleaned the cut with the same brisk efficiency she brought to her children's minor injuries. And when she was done and taping the bandage down, she looked up and found him looking at her from approximately 6 inches away, with an expression she wasn't prepared for. She stepped back. He let her. "Thank you," he said. "You need to wear gloves when you do that," she said. "I know. I mean it, Ethan. I know. I will." She made herself look at something else. His jacket, hanging over the back of the kitchen chair, wet at the shoulders. The plant on the windowsill, green and unreasonably healthy. The lineup of coffee mugs on the open shelf, mismatched, collected from various places and occasions. "Marcus called Daniel's name in his sleep last week," she said, to the mugs. "I heard him through the wall, just once. He doesn't know I heard." Ethan was quiet. "I don't know how to help him with it," she said. "I don't know if I'm supposed to say something or just let him work through it on his own. I don't know what the right call is. I don't know." She stopped, pressed her hands flat on the counter. "I don't know what I'm doing. Most days I genuinely don't know what I'm doing, and I hold it together in front of them because they need me to, but then moments like that happen and I realize how much I have no idea." She heard him move before she felt it, not touching her, just coming to stand beside her, close enough that she was aware of his presence, the way you're aware of warmth from a fire. "You don't have to know what you're doing," he said quietly. "I kind of have to. I'm all they have." "You're not all they have," he said it carefully. "Not anymore. If you don't want to be." She looked at her hands on the counter. The bandage on his hand was a small white square in her peripheral vision. "That terrifies me," she said honestly. "I know. Needing something, letting someone—" She stopped again. "I stopped being good at that. I'm not sure when exactly. Somewhere in the years of holding everything together, I stopped knowing how to put something down." "You don't have to put it all down at once," he said. "You could just start with one thing." She turned to look at him. He was right there. That was both the problem and not a problem at all, and she was still figuring out which. "I'm scared," she said. "Yeah." His voice was quiet. "So am I." "Of what?" "Of getting this wrong. Of doing something that hurts you or the kids, or that—" He exhaled. "I'm scared of wanting something and then losing it again. I'm not good at—" He stopped and she recognized it. The same thing, on his side of it. The difficulty of naming the thing that was hard. I'm not good at this either, he finally said. Whatever you think about me, I'm not good at this. I know, she said. That actually makes me feel better. He looked at her with something that was almost amusement. That's a little cruel. I mean it. If you were smooth about it, I'd trust you less. I'm completely unsmooth about everything. He looked at her. In case that's not obvious. It is obvious. There was a moment between them then. Not dramatic, not a turning point, just two people standing in a kitchen with the late December light coming through the window, and the small, fragile thing that had been growing between them for months present, enough in the room that they were both aware of it, both slightly afraid of it, both not quite ready to do anything about it. Kids are going to come downstairs in approximately 4 minutes, Ethan said. Probably, Maya agreed. So we don't have to… No. But, yeah. She straightened up from the counter. Yeah, I know. They stood there for another few seconds in the particular suspended state of two adults who have said almost but not quite everything. Then from upstairs came the thunderous sound of children negotiating the terms of coming downstairs, and the moment distributed itself back into the ordinary afternoon. The New Year arrived without ceremony. Maya worked New Year's Eve at the diner. The tips were good, and she needed them, and came home just after midnight to find both kids asleep, which was something of a miracle, and also slightly disappointing, since she'd brought party poppers. She stood in the kitchen alone and made herself a cup of tea and thought about the year that was ending. 13 months since Daniel. She thought about the shoebox, about standing on Ethan's porch in the rain, about all the small distances that had closed, slowly, without either of them fully agreeing to close them. She thought about what Daniel had written. Don't let guilt destroy your chance. She thought about the way his pen pressed too hard. Those letters with their slight emboss, the handwriting of a man who was trying to say something important and wanted to make sure it stayed. She picked up her phone. She almost put it back down. Then she typed to Ethan, Happy New Year. I think we're going to be okay. His response came in under a minute. Yeah, I think so too. And then, a moment later, Get some sleep. You've got the morning shift. She did. She went to sleep thinking about how he'd remembered she had the morning shift and what that specific kind of attention meant, and whether she was ready to let it mean anything, and she fell asleep before she'd settled any of it. February brought ice storms and a broken furnace in Maya's rental house that the landlord took 9 days to fix, during which she put both kids in extra layers and left the oven on in the evenings like her mother used to do when she was small. Ethan found out about the furnace on day 4. Lily had told him, because Ava had told Lily, because children share information with zero regard for what the adults involved might prefer, and called Maya immediately. Come stay here, he said before she'd even fully said hello. Ethan, it's 12 degrees out. It's 9 degrees at night. You can't… We're fine. I've got the oven. And Maya. His voice carried the specific frequency of someone who was trying very hard to stay calm about something they were not calm about. I have 4 bedrooms. 3 of them are currently housing nobody. You would not be putting anyone out. You would not be… It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. Why? She didn't say the actual reason, which was that moving herself and her children into Ethan's house, even temporarily, even purely out of practical necessity, would cross some line she'd been carefully not crossing. It would make things real in a way that was harder to walk back from. People will talk, she said instead. People are already talking. He said it without particular heat, just plainly. I live in Asheville, Maya. People talked when they saw your car in my driveway in December. I don't think 5 days of a broken furnace changes the conversation much. She hesitated. It's 5 days. Maybe 6. The kids are cold. I have a guest room for you, and the girls can share Lily's room, and Marcus can have the office couch, which is honestly a very comfortable couch. A pause. Please. There it was again, the word Daniel had used in the letter. The word he'd said Ethan never used. She closed her eyes. Fine, 2 days. However long you need. 2 days, Ethan. It was 5 days. And they were not neat or cinematic. Marcus spent most of the first day pretending not to be relieved about the warmth, maintaining the dignity of a 10-year-old boy by refusing to admit that his hands had been cold. Lily and Ava immediately annexed Lily's room and rearranged it to their mutual satisfaction, which involved moving the furniture in ways that Ethan discovered at 8 in the morning and responded to with a long, silent look at the ceiling. Maya cooked on the second evening because the least she could do was cook, and Ethan made her coffee the way she took it without asking. On the third morning, Marcus came downstairs early and found Ethan at the kitchen table with a laptop and a problem he was apparently working through. And instead of going back upstairs, Marcus sat down across from him and said, "What are you doing?" And Ethan showed him. And they sat there for 40 minutes while the rest of the house slept and talked about, of all things, architecture, because Marcus had been drawing buildings in his notebook since he was 7 and had never really told anyone about it. Maya came downstairs to find them like that. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched for a moment before either of them noticed her. Ethan was explaining something with a pencil on the back of a piece of mail, and Marcus was leaning forward with the specific intensity he usually reserved for things he cared about deeply, his elbows on the table, his whole attention given over. She stood there until the tea kettle started to whistle, and then she went to the kitchen. She didn't say anything about it. Not that morning, and not later. But she thought about it for a long time. On the last evening before the furnace was repaired and they went home, after the kids were in bed, she and Ethan sat on the couch in his living room with the television on, and neither of them watching it. It had been a long day. Marcus had had a difficult afternoon, something at school, and it had taken an hour and a half to talk him down from the specific angry silence he retreated to when things became too much. Ethan had stayed out of it, which was exactly right, which she'd appreciated more than she'd said. "Thank you for this week," she said. "I told you, it wasn't, don't say it wasn't a big deal." She turned to look at him. "It was. For me it was." He met her eyes, didn't argue. "I'm not good at being taken care of," she said. "I haven't been, for a long time. I don't really know how to just accept something without turning it into a debt I owe." She paused. "This week made me realize how tired I am of being the person who holds everything alone." "You don't have to be." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm starting to know that. A beat. It's taking me a while." "Take whatever while you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She believed him. That was new. She believed him, and she didn't immediately look for the flaw in it, didn't immediately calculate the ways it could fail or the reasons she shouldn't trust it, just held it quietly, like something warm that she was still learning how to hold without dropping. She turned back to the television. He didn't move away. And the gap between them on the couch was smaller than it had been an hour ago, not because either of them had made a decision to close it, but because some things close on their own, gradually, when two people stay in the same place long enough and stop actively fighting what is already there. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about any of it was perfect. But it was real, and it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. The furnace got fixed on a Thursday. By Friday evening, Maya's rental house was warm enough that she had no practical reason left to stay. She packed up her kids and their overnight bags and the bird poster that Ava had added 3 new species to during the week, and she stood in Ethan's entryway while Marcus carried the last bag out to the car, and she thought about how 5 days could rearrange something inside a person without announcing itself. "Okay," she said, "we're out of your hair." "You were never in my hair." "Ethan, I mean it." She looked at him. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed in that way he had, and he looked, she didn't have a clean word for it. He looked like someone who had gotten used to a thing and was now watching that thing leave and was trying to be reasonable about it. "Thank you," she said. "Again." "Stop thanking me." "I'll stop thanking you when you stop doing things worth thanking." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "That's going to be difficult to manage." From outside, Marcus hollered something about the car being unlocked. Ava materialized at Maya's elbow with her coat half on, one arm through the sleeve and one not, the way she always wore it, a habit Maya had given up correcting somewhere around month 3 of single parenthood. "Bye, Ethan," Ava said. "Bye, Ava. Tell Lily I'm going to learn the cedar waxwing call before Saturday." "I'll pass that along. She's going to make it competitive." "Good," Ava said, which was exactly what Lily would have said, and she went out to the car with her coat still half on. Maya laughed. It came out soft and a little surprised, the way laughs do when you're not expecting them. "She's going to be all right," Ethan said quietly. "Not a question." "Yeah." Maya looked toward where her daughter had just gone. Yeah, I think she is. She left. She drove home through the February dark with her kids in the back seat, Marcus asleep within 6 minutes the way he always could, Ava talking quietly to herself, making the cedar waxwing call under her breath, getting it slightly wrong, and trying again. The house felt different when they got back. Not bad different, just smaller, quieter, and Maya noticed it in a way she wouldn't have a week ago. She put the kids to bed and stood in the kitchen for a long moment and felt the specific shape of what she'd gotten used to and then left. She didn't text Ethan about it, but she thought about him for a while before she slept. Spring came the way it always does in the mountains. Not gradually, but in lurches, warm days interrupted by cold snaps, daffodils coming up through the last of the snow with an absolute refusal to be deterred. March arrived, and the light changed, and something in Maya changed with it. Some loosening that had been happening all winter finally becoming visible enough that even she had to acknowledge it. She was still working both jobs. She hadn't quit the cleaning shifts yet, though she'd dropped one night per week in January when the diner gave her 2 extra morning shifts. Marcus was playing soccer and doing well in school, building something that looked, cautiously, like stability. Ava had learned 7 bird calls, bested Lily in a competition that neither adult had officially sanctioned, and started sleeping with her window cracked at night so she could hear the morning birds, which meant Maya was now sleeping with a monitor on because 6-year-olds with open windows in variable mountain weather gave her low-grade anxiety, but it was a reasonable trade. And Ethan was a presence in her life now, in a way she'd stopped questioning, even if she still hadn't named what it was. Saturday afternoons had become a thing. Not every Saturday, not formally, just often enough that the kids had started assuming it, and Maya had started planning her week around it without quite registering that she'd done so. He'd come to the house sometimes, her small rental on the east side with the kitchen that got afternoon light and the backyard that was mostly brown grass and potential. He'd fixed the back gate that had been broken since October, not because she'd asked, but because he'd noticed it while walking through to where Marcus was kicking a soccer ball around, and he came back inside 15 minutes later with grass on his knees and the gate was fixed. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "The latch was completely stripped. It would have come off in the next wind." "I was going to get to it." "When?" He said it without edge, just genuinely asking. She gave him a look. He gave her one back that communicated clearly that he knew her schedule as well as she did and was not judging her for it, but also was not going to pretend the gate wouldn't have stayed broken for another 4 months. "Thank you for fixing the gate," she said. "You're welcome." "You're infuriating," also noted. That was how it went. He fixed things without making her feel like she needed fixing. He showed up without making her feel like she was being managed. She'd tried various words for it, and none of them was quite right. He was steady, in the way of something that has always been there and simply becomes more visible as the season changes. The guilt didn't disappear. She needed to be honest about that, even just to herself. Some nights it came back in full, the cold variety, the kind that waited until she was almost asleep to remind her that her husband had been dead for 15 months, and she was rearranging her week around another man, and what did that make her? She'd lie there in the dark and run the whole argument in her head, and she never came to a clean resolution. Because grief doesn't have clean resolutions. It just has the ongoing work of deciding how to live inside it. But Daniel had known that. He'd written, "Don't let guilt destroy your chance," because he'd understood, in that specific way he had of understanding things he never talked about out loud, that guilt was going to be the thing that would get between them if they let it. Not the memory of him, not the love they'd both carried for him, just the guilt, the way it would sit between them like a chaperone nobody had invited. She thought about that on the nights when the guilt was loudest, and it didn't make it quiet, but it gave her something to hold on to on the other side of it. The first time Ethan held her hand, it was an accident, or it started as one. They were at a park on a Saturday afternoon in late March, all 4 of them, which had become less remarkable than it once seemed, and Lily had convinced everyone to walk the trail that went up the East Ridge, which was ambitious for a family walk, but Lily had prepared a detailed argument for it, and nobody had the heart to say no. It was longer than it should have been, with Ava's shorter stride, and by the time they were coming back down the last section of trail, Ava had reached the outer limit of her willingness to walk under her own power, and Marcus had reached his outer limit of being the older sibling who was expected to be patient about this. Maya was managing Ava, who had decided that the best way to descend the trail was by walking with her eyes half shut and both arms out like a sleepwalker, which was dangerous and also absolutely infuriating when her boot caught a root and she pitched sideways. Not a real fall, just a stumble, her hand going out to catch herself on nothing. And Ethan's hand caught her elbow, and then her hand, steadying her, and he held it for the 2 seconds it took to make sure she had her footing back. And then he didn't let go, and she didn't pull away. They walked the last quarter mile of trail like that, not looking at each other, not discussing it, just his hand in hers, easy and warm, while Marcus complained ahead of them and Ava narrated every bird sound she heard, and Lily gave her a grade out of 10 for each identification. When they reached this parking lot and everyone split toward the car, his hand released hers without ceremony, and she felt the absence of it the way you feel the absence of something you'd already started taking for granted. She didn't say anything about it, neither did he. But on the drive home, alone with her kids, she thought about the weight of it, how normal it had felt, how that was either the simplest thing in the world or the most complicated, and she was no longer sure there was a clean difference. What she said out loud eventually was on an evening in April, a Sunday, the kids in bed and both of them at her kitchen table with the remnants of a dinner she'd cooked and he'd helped clean up from, and the conversation had been ordinary right up until it wasn't. "My neighbor asked me," Maya said, apropos of nothing they'd been discussing. Ethan looked up from his coffee. "Asked you what?" "About you. Carol, from across the street. She asked if you were my boyfriend." He went very still in the way he did when he was processing something he hadn't prepared for. "What did you say?" "I said you were a friend." A beat. "Okay." She didn't believe me. "Okay." She had the face. You know the face, the polite face that means she knows exactly what she thinks and is being tactful about it. Carol sounds perceptive. Carol is 64 years old and has watched every couple on this street for 20 years, so yes, she's perceptive. Maya wrapped her hands around her mug. "I've been thinking about it since, what I said." Ethan waited. "It felt like a lie," she said, "calling you a friend. Not because it's wrong. You are my friend. But because it's not the whole thing anymore, and saying it like that felt like I was protecting something by keeping it small." She looked at him. "And I'm tired of keeping things small." He held her gaze. "What are you saying, Maya?" "I'm saying I don't know what to call this. I'm saying I'm not ready for—" She stopped, tried again. "I'm not ready for anything that moves fast. I need slow. I need careful. I need it not to disrupt the kids more than they've already been disrupted. There are about 15 conditions." "Tell me the conditions." "Ethan, I'm serious. Tell me." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going to push you into something. Tell me what you need." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who fixed gates without being asked and remembered her shifts and had sat with her 10-year-old son at a kitchen table talking about buildings because Marcus had needed someone to see him. "I need us to be honest," she said, "with each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Done. I need the kids to come first, always. If either of us decides if it stops making sense, we have to be able to talk about it before it damages them." "Agreed." "I need you to not disappear on me." She said it quietly, but directly. "I know that's a lot to ask, but I have spent 16 months being the person who holds everything, and I cannot build something with someone who is going to vanish when it gets complicated." He didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be taking the weight of it seriously, which she'd asked for. "I have not always been great at that," he said, finally. "Staying present when things get hard. Historically, I have managed by distance." He said it plainly, without defensiveness. "I'm trying to do it differently. I can't promise I'll do it perfectly. I'm not asking for perfect." "Good, because you'd be waiting a long time." Something in her chest released quietly. "What do you need?" she asked. He seemed slightly surprised by the question, which told her something. "From this?" "From me?" "From whatever this is." He thought about it genuinely, which she appreciated. Not a quick reassurance, but an actual pause to consider. "I need you to let me in when things are hard," he said. "Not after. Not when you've already solved it by yourself. I know that's how you're wired. But I need you to try." He met her eyes. I know it goes against everything you've been doing for years, but I can't be useful to you if you only show me the parts you've already managed. She thought about the furnace, about calling him only after Carol had mentioned it to him through Lily, through Ava, about the gate she'd been meaning to fix for 5 months, about all the things she'd been quietly handling alone because asking felt like admitting a weakness she couldn't afford. That's going to be harder for me than anything else on this list, she said honestly. I know. He held her gaze. That's why I asked for it. She sat with that. But the kitchen light was warm and slightly too bright, the way rental kitchens always were. The cheap overhead fixture doing its flat-footed best. Outside, a late April wind was moving through the trees that lined the street. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, whatever this is. Let's do whatever this is. He exhaled. Not theatrical, just real. The specific exhale of someone who has been holding something and is finally allowing themselves to put it down. Yeah? Yeah, she looked at her coffee mug. I'm terrified. Yeah, he said. Same. That's not reassuring. No, but it's honest. She looked up at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them moved, and it wasn't a cinematic moment. The light was bad, and they were both tired, and there were dishes drying on the rack, and somewhere upstairs, Ava was probably not as asleep as she was supposed to be. But it was real, and she felt it settle into something instead of just hovering, and that felt, improbably, like enough. What changed after that was not dramatic. Most real changes aren't. He didn't move in. They didn't announce anything. There was no conversation with the kids, not yet. They had agreed to let that develop at whatever pace made sense, rather than making an announcement that would confuse more than clarify. The kids were already building something among themselves, the 4 of them, and it didn't need to be labeled to be real. What changed was the texture of things. He reached for her hand without waiting for a stumble to justify it. She called him when things went sideways instead of after she'd handled them, which was hard for her, and she didn't always manage it, but she managed it more than she would have 6 months ago. Once, when Marcus had a terrible week, a fight at school, a nightmare that left him shaken, a day when everything felt too close to the surface, she called Ethan without thinking and just said, I don't know how to help him. And Ethan didn't try to fix it over the phone. He just said, I'll come by after dinner. And he did. And he and Marcus shot basketball in the driveway for an hour while Maya watched from the kitchen window and felt something shift in her son's shoulders, the locked-up thing going gradually loose in the way it does when a body finally decides to trust something. She cried in the kitchen where neither of them could see her. Just for a minute. Then she washed her face and made hot chocolate, and they all sat on the porch in the May dark, and nobody talked about what had just happened, but it was in the room with them, the good version of it, the thing that had loosened. That was also the night Marcus said, out of nowhere, looking at his mug, Uncle Daniel liked hot chocolate. The porch went quiet. Maya felt her breath stop. Ethan said simply, Yeah, he did. Always wanted extra marshmallows, and then pretended he didn't. Marcus looked at him. Something passed across the boy's face. Surprise, and then something softer than surprise. He used to steal mine. He stole mine too, Ethan said. Every single time. Like I wasn't going to notice. Marcus almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way, but it got close. He was kind of sneaky. He was incredibly sneaky. He thought no one could tell, but everyone could always tell. Ethan shook his head with the specific fond exasperation of someone who had been friends with a person for a long time. He just had the confidence to go ahead anyway. Marcus sat with that. He turned his mug in his hands the way Maya had watched Ethan turn his mug 100 times, and she wondered if he'd picked it up from watching, or if it was just a thing hands do when a person is thinking. I miss him, Marcus said. The words came out small and careful, like he was testing whether the air could hold them. Me too, Ethan said. Every day. Is it going to stop feeling like that? Ethan didn't rush the answer. It's going to change, he said. The missing doesn't go away, but it stops feeling like the floor is gone. After a while, you can walk on it again. Marcus thought about that. Ava had gone very still beside him, the way she did when she was listening with her whole self. Are you walking on it? Marcus asked. Ethan looked at him steadily. Most days. Yeah. Marcus nodded, like he was filing that away. like the answer had given him something to aim for. Maya looked at this moment happening on her front porch in May and thought about Daniel writing those letters at a desk in a room she'd slept next to for 7 years. She thought about him knowing, actually knowing, that this was what she would need. Not a solution, not someone to solve the grief, just someone steady enough to sit with it on a porch in the dark and tell her son the truth. She thought, "You saw this, didn't you? You saw all of this." She didn't say it out loud. She drank her hot chocolate and listened to Marcus and Ethan talk, and let herself be in it. June arrived, warm and full, and things got complicated. She'd known they would. She'd been waiting for it, actually, the way you wait for a storm you can see from the ridge. Not because anything in particular signaled it, but because nothing good goes entirely unchallenged, and she and Ethan had been building something fragile enough that the first real wind would test it. The wind came in the form of a phone call. She was at the diner on a Tuesday morning, her regular shift, construction jacket man in his regular booth, when her phone showed a number she recognized and almost didn't answer. Patricia Bennett, Daniel's mother. She answered it in the alley where she took her breaks, standing in the narrow strip of shade behind the dumpster, which was not where she'd have chosen to have this conversation, but there wasn't a better option. "Patricia," she said. "Maya." Patricia's voice was careful in the way it had been for months, polite, slightly formal, the voice of a woman who was doing her level best with something she was not entirely at peace with. "How are the children?" "They're good. Marcus has a tournament this weekend. Ava's learning bird song." "That's nice." A pause. "I heard something. I thought it was better to call than to let it sit." Maya's stomach tightened. "What did you hear?" "That you've been spending time with Ethan Hayes." Patricia said his name with the careful neutrality of someone choosing not to say what they actually felt about it. "Quite a bit of time, from what I understand." Maya looked at the dumpster, thought about who the source might have been, which was probably someone from town, which was probably inevitable, which she'd known was coming. "We're friends," she said. "We've both been... Losing Daniel hit us both hard. We've been leaning on each other." The silence on the other end of the line was its own kind of answer. "Maya," Patricia's voice dropped some of its careful neutrality. "He's not just a friend, is he?" It wasn't quite a question. Maya closed her eyes for a second. She could lie. She could smooth it over, buy more time, manage the situation the way she'd been managing everything else. Carefully, piecemeal, one crisis at a time. She thought about what she'd said to Ethan. "I need us to be honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "No," she said. "He's not just a friend." Another silence, longer. "He was Daniel's best friend," Patricia said, and the words came out measured, but there was something raw under them, the particular rawness of a mother who had buried her son and was now trying to understand a world that kept moving forward without him. "I know. It hasn't even been 2 years." "I know. How long has this been? How long has something been?" "Patricia." Maya kept her voice quiet and steady. "I know how this looks. I know it's hard to hear. And I'm not asking you to be okay with it right now. But I need you to know that I have not forgotten your son. I will never forget him. What I had with Daniel was real, and it mattered, and nothing about what I'm doing now is a replacement for that." She stopped, let a breath out slowly. "He asked me to keep living. He actually wrote it down and asked me, and I'm trying to do that." Another long pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was different, still careful, but cracked at the edges. "He would do something like that, write it down." "Yeah." Maya's throat tightened. "He would. I just..." Patricia stopped. When she continued, she sounded like what she was, a woman in her 60s who had lost her child and was still finding her footing in a world that hadn't stopped. "I'm not ready to see it. I want you to know that. I'm not ready to see you and Ethan, and I'm not ready for that yet." "That's okay," Maya said. "I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just asking you not to shut me out, or the kids." A very long pause. "I would never shut the children out." Patricia's voice went firm on that, which was a relief. "Okay. I just need time. Take it. I mean that. Take whatever time you need." They stayed on the line for another minute without saying much, and then Patricia said she needed to go, and Maya said, okay, and they hung up, and Maya stood in the alley behind the diner for a long time afterward, looking at nothing. She texted Ethan. Patricia called. His response came quickly. How bad? She thought about it. Not terrible, not good. She needs time. A pause. Then, are you okay? She looked at her phone, thought about the question, about the fact that 2 months ago she would have said, I'm fine automatically, reflexively, the way breathing happens. No, she typed back, not entirely. But I will be. I know you will. And then, can I come by tonight? She looked at that message, at the simple, direct offer of it. Yeah, she typed, bring coffee, the good kind, done. She went back inside and refilled the coffee for the man in the construction jacket, and he didn't say thank you, same as always. But something had settled in her chest that hadn't been there before. Not resolution, because this situation didn't have a clean resolution yet, and she knew more conversations with Patricia lay ahead, and she knew there would be other calls, other voices, other people from Daniel's life who would need time she didn't have to give. But she'd told the truth. To Patricia directly, without smoothing it into something more comfortable. And she was still standing. That was something. Ethan came by at 7:30 with the good coffee from the place on Lexington that stayed open late, and Maya answered the door and he handed her the cup and said, how are you doing? And she said, honestly, tired. And he said, yeah, that tracks, and came inside without being invited because he no longer needed to be, which would have alarmed her 6 months ago and now felt like arriving somewhere she'd been headed without knowing it. They sat at the kitchen table after the kids were down, and she told him about the call, all of it, and he listened the way he'd learned to listen. Not preparing his response while she was still talking, just actually listening, his hands around his coffee cup. When she finished, he said, Richard and Patricia, they're going to get there, or they're not. But I don't think that's the thing that decides whether we do this. No, she agreed. The thing that decides whether we do this is whether we decide. He held her gaze. And I've decided. I decided a while ago. I'm just waiting on you to be ready. I'm getting there. I know. I'm not there yet. I know that too. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers, easy and warm, the same as the trail in March. There's no deadline, Maya. She looked at his hand on hers. She thought about the shoebox on his porch in October, about soup in February and fixed gates and basketball in the driveway and hot chocolate on the porch, and a cedar waxwing call practiced under a child's breath on a winter drive home. She turned her hand over under his. She held on. Outside, Asheville was doing what it did in June, warm and full and humming with its own particular life, the mountains dark at the edges against a last strip of evening sky. The kitchen light was still too bright, and the rental house was still small, and she was still tired in ways that didn't have a quick fix. But she was holding someone's hand at her own kitchen table, and that person was holding back, and for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't doing any of it alone. It wasn't perfect. She'd stopped looking for perfect. But it was hers, and she was choosing it, and that made all the difference she needed tonight. The summer passed the way summers do when you are, for the first time in a long time, actually present inside one. Quickly, and with a texture you know you'll miss before it's even gone. There were Saturday farmers markets where Lily and Ava moved together through the crowd like two fish that had figured out how to swim in the same current. Ava pointing at birds on the power lines above the stalls, while Lily identified them without looking up from whatever she was examining. There were evenings on Ethan's back porch, where Marcus and Ethan sat on opposite ends of the steps, with the architectural sketchbook Marcus had started carrying everywhere. Ethan making observations, and Marcus pushing back on them with the quiet confidence of a kid who was beginning to understand that having an opinion about something wasn't the same as being wrong. There were drives through the mountain roads with all 4 kids crammed in Ethan's SUV. They'd started saying all 4 kids as a natural unit, which none of the adults had orchestrated and all of them had noticed. And dinners that ran long because nobody wanted to be the one to say it was time to go. It was not uncomplicated. The guilt didn't disappear just because the summer was warm. Maya still had nights where she lay awake and ran the arithmetic of her own feelings against a standard she could never quite articulate, and came up short in ways she couldn't fully explain. She and Ethan still moved carefully around certain things. Public situations, the question of labels, what to tell the kids formally, versus what to let exist unnamed. They were building something, but building it quietly, the way you build something when you know it's not just yours to risk. But it was real. It was the most real thing in her life outside of her children, and she'd stopped apologizing for that, at least to herself. Then August came, and with it, Richard Bennett. Daniel's father had not been part of the phone call Patricia made in June. He was a quieter man than his wife, more interior, more deliberate, and his grief had made him quieter still. Maya had seen him at Christmas, briefly, when she'd brought the kids to the Bennett house for the annual dinner that they'd all agreed to continue because the children needed the continuity. Richard had embraced Marcus and Ava with the specific fierceness of a grandfather who understood what he was holding, and had been warm to Maya, and had not mentioned Ethan, and Maya had not brought him up, and they had all gotten through Christmas the way people get through things by collective unspoken agreement. But Richard had been watching. She should have known he'd been watching. He showed up at her house on a Thursday afternoon in early August, no call ahead, which was unlike him, which told her this was not a casual visit. She opened the door and found him standing on her porch with his hat in his hands and his expression carefully arranged, and felt the bottom of her stomach drop about 6 inches. "Richard." She stepped back. "Come in." He came in. He was 71, compact and deliberate in the way he moved, a retired engineer who had built things with his hands for 40 years and still carried himself like a man accustomed to knowing what he was doing. He sat in the living room chair that was the best chair, which she'd offered him without thinking, and held his hat on his knee. The kids were at Ethan's. She realized that immediately and understood that some part of her was grateful for it and some part of her was not, because having the kids here would have made this conversation move differently. She sat across from him and waited. "I'm going to say something," Richard began, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. He nodded once. "I've known about you and Ethan Hayes since April." He said it without accusation, just as a fact established. "Patricia told me after she called you. I've had 4 months to sit with it." He looked at his hat. "I want to tell you what I've been thinking during those 4 months, and I need you to hear all of it." "Okay." He looked up at her. "My son loved you. I watched him love you for 9 years, and I know what that looked like, and I know it was real. What you two had was not, it wasn't a comfortable thing, a convenient thing. He chose you every day. He was proud of every single day he got with you and those children." He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. "I know that. I need you to know I know that." Maya's throat had gone tight. "I know you know." "After he died, I was angry," Richard said. "Not at anyone in particular, just angry. The kind of angry that doesn't have a target because the thing you're angry at isn't something you can get to." He turned the hat on his knee. "I watched you at the funeral. I watched you hold yourself together for those kids for 2 days straight without breaking, and I thought, Daniel chose right. He really chose right." He paused. "Then someone from the church saw your car at Hayes's house in December and mentioned it at a dinner, and Patricia heard it, and—" He stopped again. "We're not proud of how we processed it initially." "Richard, let me finish." She closed her mouth. "I was angry again," he said. "The targeted kind this time. Ethan Hayes was my son's best friend. He was at our house at Thanksgiving. He was part of Daniel's life, and by extension part of ours, and watching you and him become whatever you are, it felt like a closing of ranks, like a door shutting." He exhaled slowly. Like Daniel was being written out. The living room was very quiet. Outside, a lawnmower was running somewhere down the block. "I thought about going to see Hayes," Richard said. I had some things I wanted to say. Patricia talked me out of it." He looked at Maya directly. "But then I started thinking about something else. I started thinking about what Daniel would say if he could hear what I was thinking." Maya waited. "And the honest answer," Richard said, "is that he would have told me to mind my business and stop making things harder for the people he loved." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something sadder and more complicated. He had a way of cutting through things. You know that. "Yeah," Maya said softly. "He did. He also—" Richard paused. "Patricia mentioned there was a letter for Hayes. Daniel left him a letter." "He left a lot of letters. Was there one for us?" For Patricia and me? Maya held his gaze. Yes, I gave it to Patricia when I gave out the others, last October. Richard was quiet for a moment. She didn't tell me. She might not have been ready to share what was in it. He turned the hat over once. I'll ask her tonight. He looked at Maya. What I came here to say is, I'm not there yet. I want to be honest about that. I'm working on getting there, and I believe I'll get there, but I'm not there today. And I thought you deserved to hear that from me directly instead of through town gossip or through Patricia. I appreciate that, Maya said. She meant it. I also came to say, he stopped, pressed his lips together. Those children, Marcus and Ava, they are my son. Every time I see them, they are my son, and that doesn't change. Whatever happens with you and Hayes, that doesn't change. I need you to know that. Maya felt her eyes burn. She pushed it back. I know that. They know that too. Good. He put his hat on. Stood up, which seemed to take some effort, the effort of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. I'm going to go. Richard. She stood too. Thank you for coming, for saying it to my face. It matters. He looked at her for a moment. A long, complicated look. The look of a man who is holding a great many things at once and managing them by sheer force of will. You're a good mother, he said finally. Daniel always said so. I see it. A pause. I'll try to see the rest of it in time. He left. She stood in the empty living room for several minutes after she heard his car pull away, not moving, just letting the conversation settle into the room around her. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. Hey, how's... Richard came, she said. Silence. Richard Bennett. Yes. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. She sat down on the couch. He was decent about it. It was hard, but he was decent. He's not there yet, but he's trying. She heard Ethan exhale. That's more than I expected. Me too. She leaned her head back. How are the kids? Marcus and Lily are currently engaged in a debate about whether Asheville or Charlotte would be a better city to design a building in. Ava is asleep on my couch. She just went down, which is impressive given the volume of the Charlotte debate. Maya almost laughed. She can sleep through anything. Apparently. A pause. Do you want me to bring them home, or... Give me an hour, she said. I just need an hour. Take 2, he said. I'll make dinner. The Charlotte debate probably has another 40 minutes in it. She stayed on the line a little longer than she needed to, just having him there. And then she said goodbye and sat in the quiet house and thought about Richard's face when he said those children are my son. She thought about grief being a shared language, the way it moved through a family and altered the shape of everyone it touched. She thought about how many people were orbiting Daniel's absence. Herself, Ethan, Marcus, Ava, Lily, Patricia, Richard, all of them working out how to live in the space he'd left, all of them doing it imperfectly, all of them still trying. She thought that was probably the most human thing about all of it, the trying. The gathering happened 6 weeks later on a Saturday in mid-September, and nobody had planned for it to become what it became. It started as a birthday dinner for Patricia, which happened every September, which Maya had attended every year since she'd started dating Daniel, because Patricia's birthday dinner was simply a thing that happened, and you did not opt out of it. The plan had been for Maya to bring the kids, have dinner, keep things warm and uncomplicated, go home. Ethan had not been invited because this was not the moment for that, and everyone understood this. What changed was that Marcus, the week before, told Patricia's granddaughter, Daniel's niece, who was 12, and had a wide, active social life and a slightly underdeveloped filter, that Ethan was coming to the dinner. He hadn't meant it as information. He'd been talking about something else and mentioned Ethan in passing as a normal part of his life, which Ethan was. And the granddaughter had carried this information home, and it had arrived at the Bennett house with the particular velocity of secondhand news. Patricia called Maya on Thursday. Is Ethan coming to the dinner? She asked. Maya, who had not invited Ethan, said, No, he wasn't planning to. A pause. Marcus told Emma he was. Maya closed her eyes briefly. Marcus mentioned him, I think. He's part of our lives, Patricia. The kids talk about him the way they'd talk about anyone who's around regularly. I'm not going to tell him not to talk about Ethan. I know. Patricia's voice was strained. I know that's not reasonable. So what do you want me to do? A long pause. I don't know. Do you want me to tell him to come or not to come? Or to leave it as it is? Another pause. Richard thinks he should come. That surprised Maya enough that she didn't respond immediately. Richard said that? He said, Patricia's voice did something complicated. He said that if Ethan is going to be part of our grandchildren's lives, we ought to stop making it a thing and start making it a fact. His words. A pause that carried the weight of a woman working through something she hadn't finished working through. Richard is handling this better than I am. Patricia, I'm trying, Maya. I want you to know I'm trying. I know you are. Invite him, Patricia said. Let's just do it, before I change my mind. Maya called Ethan. She told him the situation plainly, including the part about Marcus inadvertently causing the whole thing, and there was a brief silence, and then Ethan said, I don't want to make this harder for you. It might be hard regardless, she said. But Richard thinks you should come, and honestly, she paused. Honestly, I don't want to keep the two parts of my life separated forever. It's exhausting. I'm tired of it. Another silence. Are you sure? No, she said honestly. But I think it's time. He came. He brought wine. Good wine. Not ostentatious, just genuinely good. And he wore a jacket that suggested he'd thought about it without being precious about it. And when Maya opened the front door of the Bennett house to let him in, she watched the brief flash of something cross his face. Not fear exactly, but the adjacent thing, the awareness of stakes, before he put it away and followed her inside. The first 15 minutes were the hardest. Richard met him in the entryway, and they shook hands, and there was a long moment between them, two men who had both loved the same person and were now negotiating the complicated aftermath of that. And Richard said, I'm glad you came, in a way that was clearly genuine and also clearly cost him something. And Ethan said, thank you for saying that, in a way that acknowledged what it cost. Patricia was in the kitchen. Maya found her there, stirring something that didn't need stirring, and stood beside her for a moment. He's here, Maya said quietly. I know. Patricia kept stirring. Give me a minute. Maya gave her a minute. She went back to the living room where Ethan was talking to Richard about something structural. There was a renovation Richard had done to the back porch 20 years ago that had apparently done something interesting with the roof line. And Marcus had inserted himself into the conversation because, of course, he had, and Lily was explaining something to Emma with the focused intensity she brought to all explanations. And Ava was sitting on the floor by the bookcase pulling out picture books she recognized from visits to this house that went back to before she could properly remember. The house smelled like Patricia's cooking, which smelled like every birthday dinner Maya had attended here, which smelled like the specific architecture of a family that had been built over decades and was now doing the hard work of accommodating its own changed shape. Patricia came out of the kitchen 17 minutes later. She stood in the entrance to the living room. Ethan saw her and stood, which was instinct, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people who had known the same person for very different reasons and were now standing in his parents' living room trying to find the ground between them. Ethan, Patricia said. Her voice was controlled but not cold. Patricia. He didn't offer anything beyond that. Didn't try to fill the space with reassurance or apology or justification. He just stood there and let her look at him. You loved my son, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said. I did. He loved you too. He talked about you. She stopped. He talked about you the way he talked about family. Her jaw was tight. That matters to me. I need you to know that matters to me, that you were that to him. It matters to me too, Ethan said. Every day. Patricia looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Maya. Then she looked at Marcus, who was standing between the two men with his hands in his pockets, and at Ava on the floor, and at Lily, who had gone quiet in the way she went quiet when she understood that something important was happening. Dinner's ready, Patricia said, and she went back to the kitchen. That was not the end of it. It was not a reconciliation wrapped up in a bow. Patricia was quiet through most of dinner, and there were silences that had weight in them. And once, when Ethan said something that made Marcus laugh, genuinely laugh, the full version, the one that had been coming back slowly all year, Maya watched Patricia's face do something painful in private, because the laugh sounded like Daniel, and they all knew it, and they all lived with it. But Richard talked to Ethan about the porch renovation and asked his opinion about a structural problem he'd been meaning to address in the back bedroom, and Ethan gave him an actual answer instead of a diplomatic one, and Richard argued with part of it, and that was something. That was the specific language of two men who had enough respect for each other to disagree. After dinner, while the kids were in the backyard and the adults were doing the slow work of clearing up, Patricia came to stand beside Ethan in the kitchen. Maya was watching from the doorway. She couldn't help it, and said quietly enough that Maya had to strain to hear, "Daniel wrote me a letter. I read it in October. I read it again in June, after I talked to Maya." A pause. "He wrote that you were the most decent person he knew, and that decency is harder than it looks." Ethan was still. "He asked me to trust that," Patricia said. I'm working on it." "That's all I can ask," Ethan said. "Don't make me regret it," she said, and it came out fierce and soft at the same time. The voice of a woman who had been broken open by loss and was still choosing to leave the door unlocked. "Those are my grandchildren. Whatever happens, those are my grandchildren, and they come first." "They come first," Ethan agreed, "always." Patricia nodded once, sharp, like a decision being made and filed. Then she handed him a dish towel and said, "You can dry," and went back to the sink, and that was that. Maya exhaled slowly in the doorway. After, on the drive home, Ethan following in his car, the kids with Maya, Marcus said from the back seat, in the contemplative tone he used when he'd been thinking about something for a while and had finally decided to say it, "That was okay, right?" "Yeah," Maya said. "That was okay." Grandma Patricia seemed, I don't know, like it was hard. "It was hard. It's going to be hard for a while." Marcus was quiet. "Is that our fault? Me and Ava?" "No." She said it immediately and completely. "None of this is your fault. It's just, love is complicated when people are hurting, but the hurting doesn't last forever." "Does it get easier?" "Yeah," she said. "It gets easier." She thought about Richard's face when Ethan argued with him about the back bedroom structural problem. She thought about the dish towel. "Slowly," she added. "It gets easier slowly." In the rearview mirror, Marcus nodded. Ava was asleep against his shoulder, which was also becoming a pattern. Ava asleep in the car while Marcus dealt with the wake of things in his quiet, deliberate way. He looked older than 11. He'd been looking older than his age for over a year. She wanted to give him his age back. She didn't know how to do that entirely, but she was working on it. The thing that happened 2 weeks after the Bennett dinner was something Maya hadn't prepared for, which was that the town itself decided to have an opinion. It came in the form of a woman named Brenda Holt, who ran a boutique on the main street and had been at school with Patricia and considered herself a keeper of the community's social conscience. Maya encountered her at the grocery store on a Wednesday morning, in the produce section, in the particular accidental but not way of a woman who had been waiting for this encounter. "Maya," Brenda said, with the bright particular smile of someone who was about to say something that would not be bright at all. "How are you? How are those sweet children?" "We're good," Maya said. She held a head of lettuce she no longer wanted. "I saw you all at the Riverside Park last weekend." Brenda's smile stayed in place. "You and the children, and Ethan Hayes." "Yes," Maya said. "We were there." "He seems very involved," Brenda said. "In your family." "He is," Maya said, keeping her voice even. "It's only been," Brenda started. 18 months, Maya said. "I know how long it's been. I'm just saying what people are saying." "I know what people are saying." Maya put the lettuce in her basket. She could feel the specific heat in her face that preceded anger, the one she'd been managing since she was 12 years old by breathing through it and keeping her voice down. "And I understand that people care about Daniel. He was loved here. That matters, and I don't dismiss it." She met Brenda's eyes directly. "But what I do and who I love and how I build a life for my children is mine to decide. And I've decided." Brenda blinked, opened her mouth. "Tell Patricia I'll call her this week," Maya said, and moved on. She made it to the car before her hands started shaking. Not badly, just the residual tremor of adrenaline, the body's way of filing a report on what just happened. She sat in the parking lot for a minute and breathed. Then she called Ethan, which was new, the reflex to call him, the reaching for him being the first instinct instead of the fifth. Someone just confronted me at the grocery store, she said when he answered. Who? Brenda Holt. She runs the... I know who Brenda Holt is. His voice shifted. Are you okay? I'm fine. I handled it. A pause. I told her I'd decided. About you. I said it in the produce section of the grocery store, and I think I meant it more than I've said it out loud to you. A long pause. Maya, I'm not asking for anything right now, she said. I just needed you to know that I said it. That it's not something I'm hiding or managing. I said it to a woman in the produce section, and I'd say it again. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and careful and completely real. I love you, he said. She hadn't expected that. The directness of it. The way it came out without preamble, no qualification, no careful setup. Just the words in that voice, in a grocery store parking lot on a Wednesday morning. I know I said I wasn't pushing, he said, and I'm not. You don't have to say anything back, but you just told a stranger and I needed you to hear it from me clearly, not by implication. A pause. I love you. I have for a long time. And I'm going to keep showing up whether you say it back today, or in 6 months, or never. She sat in the parking lot with the phone pressed to her ear and felt the thing she'd been carrying. Not the grief, not the guilt, but the specific weight of protecting herself from this exact moment, cracked down the middle and let the light through. I know, she said. Her voice was rougher than she intended. I know you do. That's enough for right now, he said gently. That's fine. Ethan. She stopped, tried again. I'm getting there. I know. I'm almost there. I'll be here, he said. Go buy your groceries. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, a little raw, a little too wet at the edges. Yeah, she said. Okay. She went back in and bought the groceries. She walked past Brenda Holt at the register and didn't look at her, not from avoidance, but simply because Brenda Holt was no longer the point. That Saturday, Ethan came to her house. Just him, not the kids. Lily was at a school friend's birthday party. And it was the first time in months they'd had an afternoon that wasn't organized around all 4 children. And it felt slightly like standing in a room without furniture, unfamiliar and spacious. They sat on the back porch because the September air was exactly right. The specific Asheville September that smells like the summer letting go without regret. And they talked about things they hadn't gotten to talk about. Small things. The texture of daily life things that get crowded out by logistics and children and the ongoing management of grief. He told her about a project his company was working on, a development he was quietly excited about and hadn't talked about much because excitement about work had felt like a register he wasn't entitled to access for a while. She told him about Marcus's sketchbook, the buildings Marcus had been drawing, the scale of them, the ambition that was already in a 10-year-old's hand. He's going to be something, Ethan said. I know. She said it with the specific combination of pride and terror that is parenthood. That scares me a little. Watching him figure out what he is. Why scary? Because he's going to go so far from me eventually, and I want that for him. I want it more than anything. But it's... She stopped. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. I know. The yard was going gold at the edges. The early autumn light doing the thing it does in the mountains that painters come from everywhere to try to get right and never quite manage. Ethan. She said his name without a reason, just to say it. Yeah. She looked at him. He looked back. All the careful distance they'd been maintaining, the reasonable, responsible, not too fast, not too much distance, was thin right now, tissue paper thin, and they both knew it. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not the movies. She missed slightly at first because she was nervous and hadn't done this in a long time, and apparently her aim was not what it used to be, and he made a sound that was almost a laugh, and she felt it against her mouth, and then they both stopped being nervous and started being present, and it was warm and real, and a little imperfect, and exactly enough. When they pulled back, she pressed her forehead to his and they stayed there for a moment, the yard going gold around them, nobody saying anything. Okay, she said finally. Okay, he agreed. That's the first time I've done that since... She stopped. I know. I'm not going to make it weird. You're not making it weird. Good. She sat back. Good. She looked at the yard. The light was doing that thing with the oak trees. She thought about Daniel, the way she always did, the way she understood now she probably always would. But it didn't pull her under. It just sat beside her, the memory of him, patient and specific and hers. She thought he would have had something to say about this moment, probably something direct and slightly maddening that turned out to be right. I love you, she said. She said it to the yard and to Ethan beside her, and to the memory of the person who had told them both not to waste it. I do. I know I'm late saying it. Ethan took her hand. Just that. You're right on time, he said. Outside, an oak leaf came down from the tree at the far edge of the yard and turned once in the September air and landed in the brown grass. The yard was quiet, and they sat in it together in the specific, imperfect warmth of two people who had arrived at something true the long way around and didn't look away from it. The oak leaf that had fallen in the yard that September afternoon became, in Maya's memory, a kind of marker. Not a dramatic one. Life doesn't really work that way, with its clean before and after moments, but a quiet one. The kind of marker you only recognize later, when you're looking back and trying to understand when the weight finally shifted from something you were carrying to something you were choosing. After that afternoon, things didn't suddenly become easy. Easy was never the operating word for any of this, but they became more honest, which turned out to be better than easy in the ways that actually mattered. She told the kids in October, 2 weeks after that afternoon on the porch, on a Sunday evening when the dinner dishes were done and everyone was in the living room in that particular post-dinner state of having nowhere specific to be. She'd thought about it for weeks, how to say it, when to say it, whether to have Ethan there or do it alone first. She'd asked Ethan, and he'd said plainly, "Your call. I'll do whatever makes it easiest for them." Which was the right answer, and she'd decided to do it herself, the first part of it anyway, and he'd be at the house within the hour. She sat on the couch and told Marcus and Ava that Ethan was someone she loved, and that she wanted him to be more than a friend to their family, and that this didn't change anything about their father or their memories or how much Daniel had loved all of them. Marcus, who was 11 and had his father's quality of listening before he spoke, was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I already kind of knew." "Yeah?" Maya said. "You smile different when you talk about him." He said it with the slight embarrassment of someone who has just admitted to paying close attention. Like, I don't know, different. Different good or different bad? He considered this seriously. Just different, like real. She wasn't sure she'd ever been so precisely understood by another human being, and the fact that it was her 10-year-old son doing the understanding made her chest ache in a way that was equal parts pride and something she couldn't name. Ava's response was simpler and also more complete. "Does this mean Lily is going to be my sister?" Maya hesitated. It's complicated. I want her to be my sister," Ava said, with the absolute clarity of a 6-year-old who had made a decision and saw no reason to revisit it. "I know you do, babe." "So yes?" "Maybe. Someday. We're figuring it out." Ava thought about this for approximately 3 seconds and then said, "Okay," and climbed off the couch to go get a book, which was her way of indicating that she had absorbed the information and categorized it satisfactorily and was ready to move on to other matters. Marcus stayed on the couch. Maya watched him think. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He looked at his hands. I think Dad would be okay with it." Maya felt the back of her eyes burn. She didn't push it down this time. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think so too." He liked Ethan, Marcus said. He always said Ethan was the most honest person he knew, which he said was annoying, but also a small, incomplete smile. I think he meant it as a compliment. "He did." Maya reached over and squeezed her son's knee once, briefly, the way you touch something you're grateful for. He really did. When Ethan arrived 40 minutes later and Maya let him in, Marcus was in the entryway waiting, which neither adult had orchestrated. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, 10 years old going on somewhere much older, and looked at Ethan for a moment. "My mom said you love her," Marcus said. Ethan looked at him steadily. "Yes." And us? Me and Ava? Ethan didn't hesitate, but he also didn't perform. He said it the way he said things he meant, simply, without dressing it up. Yes, I do. Marcus seemed to be measuring this against some internal standard. He nodded, once, the same decisive nod his grandfather Richard made when he'd finished thinking something through. Okay, he said, and stepped back from the entryway to let Ethan in. That was, in its way, the most important moment of all. The months that followed were not a montage. There was no smooth transition, no sequence of warming scenes that moved in one clean direction. There was Marcus having a rough December and shutting everyone out for 2 weeks before finally talking, and the conversation he eventually had with Ethan at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep and came downstairs and found Ethan there. This was at Ethan's house, one of the increasing number of nights they'd all stayed over. And they sat in the kitchen, and Marcus said in the dark, "Sometimes I feel bad when I'm happy." And Ethan said, "Tell me what that's like." And Marcus did, and Ethan listened, and in the morning nothing was fixed, but something was different. There was Lily going through a phase in February where she was jealous of the time Ethan spent with Marcus, which she expressed not by saying she was jealous, she would not have described herself that way, but by becoming very interested in engineering topics and inserting herself into conversations she hadn't previously cared about. And it took Maya to notice what was happening and take Lily out for hot chocolate and say directly, "You know your dad is not going anywhere. Marcus isn't replacing you." Lily looked at her hot chocolate with the slightly stricken expression of someone who has been correctly identified. "I know that," she said too quickly. "Lily, I know. Smaller. He spends a lot of time with Marcus. They have things in common. That's good for Marcus." Maya looked at her. "It doesn't mean your dad loves you less. It means he loves more than one person, which is something people can do. You know that, right?" Lily stirred her hot chocolate. "Is it okay to feel bad about it even when you know it's wrong to feel bad?" "Yes," Maya said, without qualification. "That's just being human." Lily sat with that. "That's kind of annoying." "Yeah," Maya agreed. "It really is." There was the night in March when Maya was at the cleaning shift and got a call from the school about a situation with Ava. Nothing serious, a conflict with another child, required a parent to come. And she was 40 minutes away, and she called Ethan without thinking, and he was there in 20 minutes, and he sat with Ava in the school office and held her hand while the principal talked, and afterward took her for ice cream because he said every difficult afternoon deserved ice cream. And when Maya finally arrived, breathless and guilty, she found them at a corner table with the specific peaceful quality of two people who had gotten through something together. Ava looked up from her ice cream and said, "We're okay, Mom." Maya looked at Ethan. He looked back with the small, unremarkable expression of a man who had simply been where he was needed and didn't need it acknowledged. She sat down and ordered coffee, and they stayed another hour. Spring came, and with it a slow thawing that was not just in the mountain air, but in the room where Patricia Bennett kept her grief. It hadn't happened in a single moment. These things never do, but in the accumulation of small ones. A phone call in January where Patricia had asked, carefully, how Ethan was doing with the children. A dinner in March where she'd watched Lily explain her current project to Richard and had asked her a follow-up question, a real one, not polite but genuinely curious. An afternoon in April when she'd stood in Maya's kitchen while Ethan fixed the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for months, and she'd watched him work without saying anything, and then said quietly to Maya, "He's handy." "He is," Maya said. "Daniel couldn't fix anything," Patricia said. "You had to do everything yourself." "I know," Maya smiled. "He tried, though." Patricia made a sound that might have been a laugh. "He really did try." It was the first time either of them had laughed about Daniel in the other's presence, laughed at something fond and true without the laugh catching in grief on the way out. It was not the end of Patricia's process. Maya knew that, and didn't try to make it into more than it was. But it was something real, and she let it be real, and that felt right. The question of the future, the specific, formal, what comes next version of it, arrived in April, on an afternoon that Maya had not planned for it. They were at Ethan's house. All of them, all 4 kids and both adults, which had become so regular that the house had absorbed the weight of it. Ava's drawings on the fridge alongside Lily's, Marcus's soccer cleats by the back door next to Lily's bird-watching boots. A second set of pajamas in the guest room that nobody had specifically brought, but which had migrated there gradually, as objects do when they're where they belong. Maya was in the backyard with a cup of coffee and the specific tiredness of a woman who had worked a morning shift and come straight here and was not complaining about any of it. The maple tree at the far edge of the yard had come back fully in the spring warmth, all its leaves returned, casting the kind of light that makes everything underneath it look like it's inside something gentle. Ethan came out and sat beside her on the bench under the tree. Not the porch bench, the one further into the yard that they'd dragged out from the garage weeks ago because Ava had decided the yard needed a bench and had lobbied for it with the same unmovable conviction Lily brought to all her projects. They sat for a while without talking. Inside, the sounds of 4 children doing various things. The television, Lily's voice explaining something, the particular thump of Marcus's basketball against the hallway floor, even though he'd been told not to. "I've been thinking about something," Ethan said. "Okay," Maya said. He had his coffee mug in both hands and was looking at the maple tree. "I'm not going to do this badly," he said. "I'm not going to make it into a big speech or get down on one knee out of nowhere and make you feel like you have to respond in a way that's—" He stopped. "I just want to talk about it. Can we talk about it?" Maya looked at him. "Talk about what exactly?" "The rest of it." He glanced at her. "Whether you'd want to." She felt her heart do the specific thing it did around him now. Not the anxious flutter of early months, but something steadier, something that had settled in like a calibration. "The rest of what?" "This." He gestured vaguely at the yard, which encompassed the house and the kids inside and the shoes by the door, and the bench they were sitting on, and all of it, the whole accumulated, imperfect, living thing they'd built together. Whether you'd want to make it, not separate anymore. Whether you'd want to stop going home to the rental and start this being home. Maya put her coffee down on the grass. "Are you asking me to marry you or to move in?" "I'm asking which conversation you want to have first." She looked at the maple tree. The light through it was doing the April thing, green and particular. "That's a lot," she said. "I know. I have 2 kids with complicated feelings." "I know. And you have 1 kid with complicated feelings." "Yes." "And Patricia is still in process, I know." He turned to look at her fully. "I'm not asking you to solve all of that before we decide. I'm asking you whether you want this." He paused. "Not whether it's practical. Whether you want it." She sat with that distinction. Whether she wanted it, separate from whether it was practical, separate from whether the timing was right, separate from whether she'd finished grieving, or the kids had finished adjusting, or Patricia had finished arriving wherever she was going. Whether she, Maya Bennett, wanted this life. The maple tree filtered the afternoon light down through its new leaves. Inside, Ava was laughing at something. Marcus's basketball hit the floor one more time and then stopped, which meant someone had told him again. "Yes," she said. "I want it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Okay. I want it, and I'm still scared, and I don't know what order to do any of it in. That's fine. And we have to talk to the kids before anything is... Of course. And I want to call Patricia before we... Yes. Obviously." He was watching her with that look, the one she'd stopped being afraid of, the one that saw her clearly and didn't require her to be anything other than what she was. "All of that. All of it in whatever order you need. I just needed to know if you wanted it." She looked at him. "When did you decide?" "On the trail in March," he said. "When I held your hand and didn't want to let go." "That was over a year ago." "I know." The ghost of a smile. "I told you I wasn't in a hurry." She laughed. It came out full and warm and surprised, the way laughter does when it's the real kind. He proposed properly 3 weeks later, not on the bench but close to it, under the maple tree on a Sunday afternoon in late April when the air was exactly right and the kids were in on it, which was Lily's condition for agreeing to keep the secret for 72 hours, which was the longest Lily had ever kept a secret in her life, and she reported this with great pride afterward. It was not the diamonds and champagne version. It was Ethan sitting beside her on the bench, pulling a ring from his jacket pocket that had been his grandmother's. Simple, old, a thin band with a small stone, and saying, "I know this isn't grand. I know you don't need grand, but I wanted it to be real. He looked at her. Will you marry me? From behind the tree came the muffled, unconvincing sounds of 3 children and one 10-year-old attempting not to exist. Is everyone hiding behind that tree? Maya asked. Yes, Ethan admitted. Lily's idea. Of course it was. She looked at the ring, then at him. Yes, she said. Yes. From behind the tree came an explosion of noise. Lily first, loudest, followed by Ava, followed by Marcus's slightly more restrained but genuine whoop. And then all 3 of them were in the yard, and Ava launched herself at Maya, and Lily launched herself at Ethan, and Marcus stood a few feet back with his hands in his pockets, wearing an expression he was clearly trying to keep neutral and completely failing at. You okay? Ethan asked him over Lily's shoulder. Yeah, Marcus said, then with the specific difficulty of a boy trying to say something that mattered. I'm glad it's you. Ethan looked at him, set Lily down, crossed the few feet between them, and put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Not a hug, which Marcus wasn't ready for yet, but a grip, steady and real. Me too, he said. I'm glad it's all of you. Marcus nodded, pressed his lips together, put his hands back in his pockets. That was enough. They told the families before they told the town, which was the right order. Richard took the news with his characteristic deliberateness, heard it, sat with it, asked one question about the timeline, and then said, take care of her, take care of all of them. Simple and complete. Patricia was harder. Maya went to see her alone, which was also the right call. She sat in Patricia's kitchen at the table where she'd sat 100 times over a decade, and told her directly and watched Patricia's face move through several things in the space of a minute. A tightening, something that might have been grief, something that might have been anger, and then, slowly, something that was neither. Daniel would have wanted this, Patricia said, finally. Not warmly, not yet, but honestly. I know, Maya said. I don't have to want it today to know that. You don't, Maya agreed. Patricia looked at her. The long, thorough look of a woman who has been watching another woman for a decade and knows her well enough to see what's real. Are you happy? The question was so direct and so genuine that Maya's throat tightened. Yeah, she said. I am. Patricia nodded, the same way Richard nodded, the family expression. Then I'll get there, she said. Give me time. You can have all the time you need. I'll be at the wedding, Patricia said. I need you to know that. Whatever I'm still working through, I'll be there. Maya reached across the table and covered Patricia's hand with hers, and Patricia didn't pull away, and they sat like that for a while in the kitchen that smelled like the way all of Maya's Sundays had smelled for 9 years. The wedding was in September, 11 months after Ethan had first said I love you in a grocery store parking lot. It was small. Both of them had wanted small, had agreed on small without much discussion because it felt right for what this was. Not a declaration to the world, a fact, witnessed by the people who mattered. They held it in Ethan's backyard, under the maple tree, because the maple tree was where things had happened, and it seemed right to let it carry this one too. The leaves had just begun to turn. That first week of September when the green is starting to let go at the edges, when the mountain air carries the memory of summer and the rumor of what's coming. There were maybe 60 people, Richard and Patricia, both of them, the Bennett's extended family, some of whom had not been there yet and came out of love for Daniel's children and left, Maya thought, having found something they hadn't expected. Ethan's business partner and his wife, Maya's sister from Richmond, who had driven up and spent 3 days being the kind of family you don't always appreciate until a specific moment makes it clear you need them. Mrs. Calloway from across the street. Some friends, some colleagues, the woman from the diner who always brought Maya coffee before her shift started without being asked. And the kids dressed in the clothes they'd each chosen for themselves, which meant Marcus wore a tie he'd asked to buy specifically for this, and Ava wore a yellow dress she'd been planning since April, and Lily wore a skirt and the bird-watching boots because she had made a strong case that the boots were her most important item of clothing, and no one had successfully argued otherwise. Maya stood under the maple tree in a dress she'd found at a consignment shop in July. Not white, dusty rose. Simple enough that it didn't require an occasion, complicated enough that it was one. And Ethan stood across from her in a dark suit with a pocket square Lily had picked out, and the specific expression of a man who was not going to hold himself together as completely as he'd intended, which she had predicted and which she found, honestly, a relief. She didn't want the composed version. She wanted the real one. The officiant was a friend of Ethan's, a civil one, soft-spoken, who had known them separately and then together, and seemed to understand what this gathering was actually doing, which was not only celebrating a beginning, but acknowledging everything that had made the beginning possible, including the loss that preceded it. He spoke about love as something that doesn't diminish by existing alongside grief. He spoke about the courage required to rebuild, not as an act of forgetting, but as an act of faith in the living. He didn't name Daniel. Maya and Ethan had talked about this, had decided it would be too weighted, that Daniel was present in the room without being named, in the faces of two children who carried him in their eyes, in the presence of his parents, in the very fact of this gathering. But what the officiant said left room for him. Let him be there in the space between the words. When Ethan took her hand, his was not entirely steady. "I'm nervous," he said quietly, under the ceremony. "I know," she said. "That's stupid. I'm 42 years old." 32, she said. Yes, that." He exhaled. "I'm nervous." "Me too." She squeezed his hand. Say the words." He said the words. She said hers. They were not the elaborate vows of people who had been planning this for years. They were the direct, slightly imperfect sentences of two adults who had practiced honesty with each other long enough that performance felt wrong. He said, "I will show up. I will stay. I will choose this every day, even on the days it's hard, especially on those days." She said, "I will let you in. I will ask for help. I will trust you with the things that are hard to trust anyone with." Marcus, standing just to the side, was doing the thing where he pressed his lips together to keep his expression neutral. It wasn't working particularly well, and she loved him for it. Ava was crying, just slightly. She seemed surprised by this, as if her own body had made a unilateral decision she hadn't been consulted on. And she looked at Lily beside her for guidance, and Lily, who was also suspiciously bright-eyed, whispered something that made Ava nod and stand straighter. When it was done, when the officiant said whatever the civil version of done is, and Ethan kissed her in front of 60 people in the September light under the maple tree. The sound that came from the gathered people was not a dramatic cheer. It was warmer than that and less theatrical. It was the sound of a group of people breathing out at once, releasing something they'd all been holding. Because what they'd witnessed was not just a wedding, but the completion of a story that had cost everyone in that yard something and was worth it anyway. Patricia was the one Maya looked for first, after. She found her with Richard, standing slightly apart from the immediate crowd, and their eyes met across the yard, and Patricia gave a single, deliberate nod. Not happy, not unhappy, something more complex and more honest. The nod of a woman who had kept her promise to show up, and had. Maya pressed a hand to her own chest for a moment. Then she went to her husband, who was being hugged by Lily with both arms and all available force, and she laughed and pulled Ava to her side and met Marcus's eyes over everyone's heads. "You okay?" she asked him. "Yeah," he said, and this time it sounded true in a way it hadn't always. The dinner was long. There was music. Someone had made a playlist that managed to be exactly right in the way playlist making occasionally achieves when the person making it truly knows the people it's for. The mountain air went from warm to cool as the evening progressed, and someone brought out blankets and nobody left, which is always the truest measure of whether a gathering was worth having. Richard danced with Ava, who was a surprisingly committed dancer for a 6-year-old. Marcus spent an hour talking to Ethan's business partner about structural engineering, and nobody had to prompt the conversation. Lily gave a toast that she had prepared without telling anyone, which ran to approximately 4 minutes and included 3 bird facts that she considered relevant to the themes of the evening, and which was, genuinely, the best speech of the night. Patricia sat with Maya for an hour after dinner, just the two of them with their glasses of wine at the table as the rest of the gathering moved around them. They talked about Daniel, directly, for the first time, not around him but about him. The specific things. His handwriting that pressed too hard. The way he stole marshmallows from other people's cocoa. The time he got lost in Denver on a business trip and called Patricia from a stranger's phone at midnight because he'd lost his own, perfectly calm, as if this were a reasonable thing to have happen. They laughed, both of them, and the laughing didn't catch. It just went where it was supposed to go, and came back, and both of them were still there on the other side of it. "He would have liked tonight," Patricia said, finally. Yeah, Maya said. He would have tried to give a toast. It would have gone long. It would have gone so long, she smiled, and it would have been exactly right. Patricia looked at her wine glass. I'm sorry it took me so long. Don't be. I am anyway. Okay, Maya said. Then I accept it. And I'm glad you're here. Patricia looked up. I'm glad too, she said quietly. I am. The night went on. The string lights, Lily's design, which she'd argued for with specifics, moved slightly in the mountain breeze, and the yard held its 60 people until the mountain dark came all the way down, and the children started making the involuntary sounds of people whose bodies had been awake too long but whose hearts weren't ready to stop. Ethan found Maya at the edge of the yard sometime after 10, standing a few feet from the maple tree in the particular quiet that gathers at the edges of celebrations when things are winding down. He came to stand beside her, and she leaned into him slightly, naturally, the way you lean into something that's been solid long enough that you trust it without thinking. The kids were visible from where they stood. Marcus sitting with Lily on the bench under the tree, both of them quiet now, the talking down phase of a long day. Ava somewhere near Richard and Patricia's table, half asleep on Richard's arm. Look at that, Maya said quietly. Ethan followed her gaze. Yeah. She's asleep on your father-in-law. He's going to sit there all night rather than wake her up. I know. Maya watched Richard's hand resting gently on the top of Ava's head. I know he will. They stood there in the particular quiet of two people who have been working toward something for a long time and have arrived at it and are now having the specific experience of actually being inside it, which is both exactly what you expected and nothing like what you expected. I keep thinking about the shoebox, Maya said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Yeah? I keep thinking about standing on your porch, that first night. She shook her head slightly. I was so scared. I almost didn't go. I stood on the sidewalk for 11 minutes and almost went home. I didn't know that. I know. She looked at the maple tree, at Marcus and Lily on the bench. If I'd gone home, don't do that. I'm not. I'm just... She stopped. I'm grateful I knocked, that's all. Ethan's arm came around her, easy and complete. Me too. She thought about Daniel at his desk, pen pressed too hard, writing things he knew he might not get to say out loud because the time was running out and there were things that needed to be said and he was too honest to leave them unsaid. She thought about the careful underline beneath Ethan's name, the instruction one year, as if he'd understood that both of them would need time to get to a place where they could hear what he was trying to say. He had understood that. He'd understood both of them, clearly, without illusion, and he'd loved them anyway, and he'd wanted them to live. That was the thing about grief that people didn't always tell you. It didn't end. It changed form. It became something you could carry without being bent double, something you could set beside the life you were living instead of inside it, blocking the view. Daniel was not gone from this yard. He was in his children's faces, and in the laugh Marcus had finally started letting people hear, and in the particular way Ava held her hands when she was paying close attention. He was in the reason Patricia and Richard were here, in the reason this particular gathering had this particular weight. He was not replaced. That had never been the question. The question had always been whether the people he loved were going to keep living. The answer, tonight, was yes. Ethan held her and the string lights moved in the mountain breeze, and somewhere under the maple tree Marcus said something that made Lily laugh, the full version of her laugh, startling after the quiet, and it went out into the September night like something being released. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. She thought, we kept going. You asked us to, and we kept going. She thought, look what we built. The things she'd lost were still lost. The grief was still real, and would always be real, and she understood now that the secret wasn't to stop missing what you'd lost. The secret was that missing something and loving something else were not opposites. They were not competing for the same space. You could carry both. You could carry the whole weight of what you'd lost and still have your hands free for what was left, for what was new, for what was given back to you in forms you hadn't been expecting. She had not expected this yard, this night, this man beside her, these 4 children who had found each other in the specific way that children find each other when their parents stop standing in the way of it. She had not expected to get here, but here is where you end up when you keep going. Even on the days when keeping going is all you've got. One step, One kitchen conversation, one honest phone call at a time. One plant rescued from too much direct sun. One gate fixed without being asked. One hand held on a trail in March. One letter from a man who saw further than anyone knew and trusted the people he loved to find their way to what he'd seen. It wasn't a perfect story. Perfect stories aren't true enough to hold. This one had dirt on it, and broken furnaces and grocery store confrontations, and a boy who called his father's name in his sleep, and a woman who stood on a sidewalk for 11 minutes afraid to knock. It had a grandmother who came to a wedding before she was ready because she'd made a promise. It had a 10-year-old who learned to let someone in one basketball game at a time. It had two people who were scared and tired and imperfect and chose each other anyway, slowly, the long way around. That's the true version. That's the only version that lasts. Maya opened her eyes. The yard was still there. The lights were still moving. Ethan's arm was still around her, and she was still inside the life she'd been afraid to want. "Thank you," she said. She didn't say it to Ethan, not exactly, or not only. She said it to the yard and the mountain air and the maple tree that had been here longer than all of them, that would be here after. She said it to the year of grief that had not killed her. She said it to the letter in a shoebox that had started all of this on a rainy afternoon in October. She said it because gratitude, even when it's complicated, even when it's tangled up with loss, is one of the only honest responses to a life that has given you more than you thought you could hold. Ethan heard her. He didn't ask who she was talking to. He just held on. And the mountain dark came all the way down over Asheville, and the string lights held against it, and the people Maya loved most in the world were all in the same yard, and for the first time in a very long time, not perfectly, not without cost, not without the memory of everything that had led here, her family felt complete. Not because the loss was gone, but because they'd been brave enough to keep going until love caught up with them. And it had. It had.